Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.
You know, there is the skill of adaptation, which really doesn't get enough credit these days. And if you're within the sound of my voice, that must mean you are in the seats with, once again, as always, my name is David Voigt. I am the venerable host of this podcast, where we sit down with a wide-ranging variety of industry professionals and not only pick their brain about current projects, but influences, what got them into the business, and so very much more. If you need to subscribe to our podcast, may I recommend you do that over at Apple, over at Spotify, and you can find everything archived over on our YouTube channel at In the Seats. Also, don't forget to follow us on the social media at In the Seats or at It's Podcast One for all the updates. And please visit us where it all began, over at intheseats.ca for all the latest and greatest movie news, reviews, updates, and everything under the sun cinematic that we love to talk about over there. Now, on today's episode, we've got an interesting one. We are talking with director Deborah Shaffer about her new film, which is hitting virtual cinemas for our neighbors to the south this Friday, called Queen of Hearts, Audrey Flack, about the abstract and photorealist artist Audrey Flack. And Audrey is really a fascinating character because throughout her entire career of being an artist in the art world, there's always been a degree of adaptation and sort of willingness to do different things, which we don't always necessarily appreciate out of some of the greats that really have occupied the history of popular art in all of its forms. And she's a fantastic artist and a really interesting subject, and Deborah does a great job on this film. And when we talk with her, not only talk about how she ultimately decided to make a film about Audrey, but also just in terms of, dealing with subjects, in terms of, how to sort of walk that line between, narrative and sort of something that's getting a little too personal, and also just the art form in general, because she is a fantastic filmmaker who has won countless awards, and since we love documentaries over here in the seats, it was a bit of a pleasure to be able to talk to her about this. And on that note, let's listen to the conversation. But anyway, just to kick it off, I just wanted to say, obviously, thank you again for the time, and congratulations on the film. I really enjoyed it because I didn't necessarily know a lot about Audrey, and I think the first thing that really struck me was just because in the history of artists and people who paint and make art in general, there isn't necessarily a lot of shifting of form or shifting of tone. And I mean, I was really sort of taken aback about how Audrey really wasn't afraid to sort of change streams in terms of the kind of art that she made. And I'm kind of curious, for you, what was sort of the impetus, or what was sort of the kickoff to, okay, this is a good subject for a film, I want to tell her story?
Well, so what's interesting is I didn't know much about her art either when I started this film. It wasn't because of the art. A friend introduced me, somebody I had co-directed a film with previously called To Be Heard, about a poetry workshop in the South Bronx. And my friend said, I've met this woman out in Long Island and we have to do a film about her, is what she said. And I said, well, okay. And in many of my projects, I have to confess, over the years have started this way. You kind of tumble into them because if you think too much about it, you never do it. You right. know too much. Finally, you learn too much and you think, no, I'm not going to do that. So my friend set up a coffee with Audrey on the Upper West Side. It was a wintry day, and I remember sitting there for quite a while. And, really the only way to put it is I fell in love with Audrey. I mean, she was such a good storyteller, and she told us her life story kind of in a nutshell. The whole trajectory of it, the sort of the, just given how far back in time her, she covered so much ground in terms of different movements that she was around, and things she'd been through and things she'd seen and things she'd experienced, and her children and being a mother. And so for me, it was always about much more than her art, which I think the film is also about much more than her art.
Agreed, yeah.
It's about being a woman in the 50s and 60s and 70s and even today. And I've just added a new signature line to my email that from an article in the New York Times saying a recent survey of major museums confirmed that 87% of their holdings are by white artists and 85% are by men. So, things haven't, these are areas that have interested me for my whole, now 50-year career in film. And yeah, so the starting point was Audrey. And then about her art, I got to know her art through getting to know her. And I think the first thing also that struck me about that is she's the real deal as an artist.
Yeah.
She's just somebody who's so compelled to do what she does. And I remember her husband saying to me early on, he said, you walk down a block with Audrey and you see this and you see that, he said, you talk to Audrey at the end of the block and she tells you what she saw. And it's mind-boggling. She's just, and I was really drawn to that, to the creative process and the fact that, she was 85 when I started this film. So, I was interested in that too. How do you keep going? What's the engine?
That kind of dovetails into something else that just really caught my eye with the film, because she is really this, and I love how you say that you stumbled into, sort of finding a subject, because though I would imagine those are the best kind of subjects that you would find, the people that you sort of come across. And I'm kind of curious, for you as a filmmaker, as a documentarian, when you have a subject, how do you sort of engender that trust and sort of draw a division? Because I can imagine, as much as you want Audrey to be Audrey, you don't necessarily want Audrey to take up all the air in the room as well. You're still the one making the film. I'm kind of curious on the balance of that.
It was a struggle sometimes. I think Audrey agreed to it because, first of all, nobody ever really realizes what an imposition it's going to be when they say yes.
Yeah.
I feel frankly sorry for everybody who says yes to me or any filmmaker, because they just don't realize that people are going to come back and come back and come back and come back and ask for more and ask for more and spend time and want to be in your house. And I forced Audrey to go into the studio time. She said, I don't feel like going into the studio right now. I don't want to paint. And I said, Audrey, I need to get some shots of this or that. I've got the crew here. I've paid the crew. We're out in Long Island, But I think she probably thought she would have more control over it, that it would be more like, so I think she was a little surprised. Okay. I wouldn't let her see it while we were working on it. And that became a kind of it almost became funny, because Audrey is insistent, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
And she just insisted and insisted and insisted. She wanted to see the film. And I kept saying, I will show it to you before it's done. But you can't. And she would ask me if this was in it or that was in it. And I said, I can't discuss it with you. And she finally developed a line to try to get under my skin. She said, well, something must be wrong with it if you're not going to show it to me. What's wrong with it? And we finally did show it to her like a week before, we were really done, essentially. If there was something she'd had a huge problem with, I would have dealt with it. But I needed, it is my film. It is my film. It's not Audrey's film. And, the problem is, I think biographies, I've been watching now, I don't generally do biographical films, and I've been watching a lot of them. And I think they're very tricky, because it's very easy to fall into hagiography. It's very easy to just be on the surface. I find a lot of, and especially famous people biographies. I think those are really, I had an idea about a very well-known person. And I thought, I don't think I can get under their skin. I don't think I'll get close in the way I need to be close to somebody. Oh, so you were asking about trust. It's fundamental. You can't make a documentary. No matter, oops, sorry about that. It's my alarm reminding me to call you. No matter what the subject or the, anything, if you don't develop that trust with your subject, you're not going to get anything on screen. It all depends in documentaries on filmmaker integrity and trust with the subject, I think. And you just,
so true.
It's time. You just have to put in the time. You have to Audrey and I love each other. We are, I've probably, I have to think about this. I hadn't said this before, but it might be fair to say I got closer to her personally than I have maybe to almost any other subject I've ever filmed. Because a lot of my other films have been more kind of, the Latin America, human rights. I did women in Chile. I did these kids doing this poetry class in the South Bronx. Audrey's probably, in a way, more of my world than almost anybody else I've ever made a film about. So we became extremely close.
No, I mean, just almost as an offshoot of that, because, I mean, obviously, when you're doing something like this, you're going to rely on the subject, at least in part, for your research. But at the same time, I imagine you've got to find a certain degree of external sources just to, like I say, keep her at least somewhat separated from the process of the narrative that you're trying to build.
Well, this is the perfect opportunity to talk about my partner on the film, Rachel Reichman, who I hired initially to help me edit the trailer. She and I had edited together before, and I knew she was a really brilliant editor. So she helped me do a little fundraising piece. And then when it came time to cut the film, I kind of dragged her into it. I wasn't sure when I'd be able to pay her and how much, and what, we couldn't really work full time because I didn't have funding. And it worked out for her because she had some family stuff to deal with. Anyway, it turns out what I didn't realize is that Rachel had a really strong art background. Her mother had been an art teacher, and she had spent her youth in museums. And it turns out she had fallen in love with Audrey's work when she was a teenager.
Wow.
So she knew Audrey's photorealist work, but she also knew, in a way, she knew art history better than I did. And I really give her credit for, insisting that we had to bring in Audrey's contemporaries at every stage of her work. And so, that's why we do it's a quick survey, but we kind of do a survey of what other, women artists were doing in that period of feminist art, and what the other abstract expressionists were doing, and what the other photorealists were doing. And Rachel really gets a lot of credit for helping broaden the film that way. And then, of course, we went to people to interview. Audrey had nothing to do with that. I mean, we just, I approached other people who had either written about her, written about photorealism, who I knew had been in her life. At one point, I tried to track down her former husband, which Audrey would not have been happy about, actually, if I had interviewed him, I'm sure. But as it turns out, he was ill and actually passed away before the film was finished. But I just do that on that's my department. It's not the subject's area to say who else and what else will be in the film. But I think Audrey's very proud that we situated her, and she has said so. I've heard her say it in Q&As, that she's very proud that we've situated her in art history.
Well, and I mean, she obviously deserves her rightful spot in there as well. And I mean, this is something that always kind of fascinates me, because when people, I mean, I would say people on the outside looking in don't necessarily understand the dynamics of documentary filmmaking, because I mean, like you said earlier, I mean, sometimes these things come about due to a chance meeting and then a coffee and then, oh, hey, we're making a film. Like, when you're trying to sort of looking for your next project, like, can you actively be looking for something, or is it just a question of like stumbling into it? Because I mean, some documentaries will take 10 years, some will happen, when you get a phone call and then you got to grab your camera and go. It's like there's really that much of a difference in terms of how these things really get started.
I've done both. I mean, I'm always looking for, somebody once was interviewing me for a teaching job years ago at a film school. And they said, well, how do you get your ideas for films? And I laughed because, I read the paper every day. So I have stacks and stacks and stacks of notes of ideas for films that obviously never got made. Some of them I tried to make and they never got funded. I mean, this is a huge issue in documentary. Even worse in the US, I think, than in Canada, where at least there's some support from the NFB and the CBC.
Yeah.
There's so little support. I was just thinking about this morning because, I have another questionnaire I have to fill out about the film, and they ask about funding. And this one was just horrible to get funded. And I ended up doing something I've never done in my life before, which is I spent some of my own money on it. I was in a position to be able to. I hadn't been able to when I was, earlier in my career. I literally could not have afforded it. And so many people said to me while I was bemoaning how hard it was to get a grant for this film or raise funds, they said, oh, well, art films are hard to fund. And I looked at them and I said, no, I didn't know art films are hard to fund. And it's one of those, like, if I'd known what I was getting into, maybe I would have hesitated. And it's been that way. I don't know. It's been that way every time. I mean, some of the films have been complete serendipity, and sometimes people have come to me and said, how about this? And it has, really appealed to me. And sometimes I've said, gee, what am I going to do next? And, I've always got a couple of ideas stewing at any given time.
How has the technology changed sort of documentary filmmaking? Because, I mean, it's not a question of you have to run around with film stock while you're shooting anymore. It's just a question of point and go.
Well, yeah, but I don't, I think, well, first of all, I don't do my own shooting.
Okay.
I never have. I mean, I suppose I could. And some of my friends who didn't start out doing their own shooting have learned to do it. And I'm obviously a better, even amateur cinematographer than, your ordinary person. But I just believe in the profession of cinematography. And so it's not so easy for me to just grab and go.
Okay.
I can do research, but I do need to, I do want to have a proper crew, and so I don't want to have to be directing the film and worrying about the picture and the sound. It's hard. I mean, people do it, but it's just not my thing. It's not what I'm good at. So, I mean, it's definitely, the technology is definitely democratized. The technology has definitely made things more democratic, but you still have to have a good idea.
Yeah.
You still, the bottom line is, it's like, what's in your brain. You have to have a good idea. You have to have a good subject. You have to know what to do about your subject. And I think there's still a discipline to documentary filmmaking, to knowing, not just shooting everything that moves. And I mean, I'm grateful that I came up in a time when we shot on film, because I mean, I love to entertain my crew with stories of, I used to do interviews and turn the camera person on and off while the interview subject was talking secretly. I would be giving them signals to turn on and off to save film, because I couldn't afford to just keep rolling film through the camera.
Right.
It's hundreds of dollars every 10 minutes of film. So people don't have to do that anymore. But then you end up with hundreds of hours of transcripts, and you have to wade through them and edit them. It's an expense in another way. And you end up spending so much time trying to figure out what you've got. If you can think about, if you know what you're doing, well, nobody ever knows entirely what they're doing, but if you have an idea what you're doing before you go in, an idea what your themes are and what you're after, I think oops, I'm sorry about that alarm.
No problem.
You're much better off. I thought I'd turned it off.
Do you think that's the dividing line for documentary filmmaking, though? Because, I mean, a lot of people, like, it's hard to even concept that most of your job as a director of a documentary film is done in research, is done in the editing bay. Because, I mean, while you're shooting things, you can obviously have an idea of what you're going to do, but do you ever really find it until sort of you're in post?
No, when I used to teach film, I used to tell my students, when it comes to editing, I said, throw your script away when you go in the editing room. Just throw it away. Throw away everything you thought you were going to do, because you have to find the film in the material you actually have in front of you. And there are often surprises. There are often, you learn things, you think you know what you're shooting, and you listen to what people said on the surface, but sometimes what they said isn't really what was going on. So you only find that out by, I changed my mind several times in this film about why Audrey quit painting and went to sculpture, actually. I kept, at first, we were like halfway through the editing, and I thought, well, you know what? I think she really quit because she was just too bummed out by all the negative press and all the bad publicity. And she just felt too rejected, and that's why she quit. And then I reversed that position later. After like really even digging deeper and living with the material more and re-editing and going back over, because we reviewed similar but in material in various interviews. I said, no, she was done with it. She changed directions because she was done with that. She had done that. I brought up the example the other day. You started with Audrey changing styles, and I brought up the example of, I'd been in the Museum of Modern Art recently, and I walked through the room where there were a lot of Picassos. And so he popped into my mind because certainly Picasso is an artist who changed constantly.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think people they don't think of it because I don't know why, but some artists do and some don't. And speaking of the Museum of Modern Art, the reason I was there is when they reopened, they have hung a painting of Audrey's that they acquired in 1975 called Leonardo's Lady. It's one of her huge photorealist paintings. I believe it's the first photorealist painting that the Museum of Modern Art ever acquired, and it hasn't been hanging since then. And it's at the top of the escalator on the 5th floor at the reopened MoMA, and it's magnificent.
That's amazing.
It's wonderful. They didn't even tell Audrey they were going to do it.
Really?
Nope. My editor was there, and the day it opened or the day after, and sent us a text of herself standing, a photo of herself standing in front of it. So I'm hoping that, we'll do something later on. We'll show the film at MoMA, I hope. And, I'm hoping Audrey gets her due. You brought that up too. I mean, Audrey is overdue.
Totally. Now, I mean, I guess just to start putting a bow on this, for you, thinking back, can you sort of boil down your career to, I don't want to say career, but maybe sort of that one movie or that one moment in your life where sort of the light bulb went off in your head and you said, okay, I want to do this. I want to tell stories in this particular way.
I think it was pretty early on. I mean, I had discovered film through politics, actually. I came into film through the anti-Vietnam War movement because I fell in with a group of people who were making, I was becoming active in the anti-war movement, and I fell in with a group of people who were making films, and I didn't fancy myself an organizer or a militant or in this. I mean, I went to marches and stuff, but I wasn't that kind of. That wasn't me. And so the films, I found that it was a really great way for me to say what I wanted to say. I would take the films out. I started by taking films out to organizing to screenings in schools, high schools, labor unions, churches. And I saw the power of film to change people's minds. And then when somebody started teaching me a little bit of the craft, I was working with this group, and somebody handed me a camera one day at a demonstration, said, "Here, you shoot." And even though I'm not a cinematographer, I became an editor, actually. What the craft I gravitated to was editing. And I discovered that I loved it. I just loved, I'd never had any idea of being a filmmaker. In the 70s, people did not go to film school to learn documentary filmmaking, particularly, especially. It would have been unheard of. And it had never occurred to me that I would be a filmmaker. I mean, it just was never, but I just loved it. I loved the craft. And I loved the power. So that was the beginning. That was definitely the beginning. Later, the other moment was I couldn't figure out what my films had to do with each other. They seemed so disparate. But it finally occurred to me they were all about people. They really were all centered around people, even individual human beings with a real sense of idealism and a real dedication, whether it was a political cause or a revolution or their art. That's sort of the central glue, I think, that holds all my works together, one after the other. That they're really about people of commitment and integrity, and that's what I was interested in.
Now,
sorry, go ahead.
Well, no, that kind of dovetails into something else, because this is something I'm always kind of fascinated by. Obviously, when you're making films, and especially when you're making films about people and these really compelling people like Audrey, I can imagine there is a difficulty in not necessarily letting go of the person, because obviously you've developed a relationship and that is, you can separate that from the film. But how do you ultimately sort of walk away from the film when it's done? because obviously there is going to be a very personal element to it that you're putting up on screen, and as a filmmaker, you do have to sort of step away from and go, okay, it's done. I got to move on to the next one.
Well, you do and you don't walk away. I think it's a great relief to me right now. I'm just really thrilled that this week, in a way, is the completion of Queen of Hearts, Audrey Flack, because it's releasing, it's having its virtual release. Now, it's, of course, extremely sad that it's not having a physical, that it's not in theaters, and I haven't been able to go to festivals and do Q&As in person with people, which is one of the few perks we get as documentary filmmakers, is getting to travel around and meet people and go places. And but I'm very, very grateful that, all this hard work. And we started filming, it's actually almost 5 years. We started filming in January of 2016. So it's coming up on 5 years since I started. And that meeting with Audrey that I described was at the end of 2015. So it's just 5 years ago. And I'm very satisfied, but you never really walk away. There's still, those films are all, it's like your children. I mean, I'm restoring all of my older films right now and going to re-release them. Most of them had fallen out of distribution. They were going back to, one film from the late 70s has been released by Criterion as part of a collection. But my films from the 70s and 80s and 90s are being re-released by another distributor, and I'm in the process of restoring them all. So you never say goodbye.
Well, and that's such an important thing too, because that's something else that people don't necessarily, click into right away. There are so many great films out there that it's far too easy to lose them based on distribution deals or this company going bankrupt or this, that, or the other. It's important to be able to preserve all of these in all their forms.
Yeah, but it's hard work. It's hard work. You have to be, I've had to make a commitment to it and, do that. It's as much work as starting another project right now. This one has to go to the lab. That one needs a different restoration. This one needs that. Where are the elements? Who's got, things are scattered. But I also as an example, Witness to War, which is the short I made that won an Academy Award in '85. That's about a doctor named Charlie Clements. We're still very close. I just was corresponding with him recently. He was actually in South Carolina doing, getting people to the polls, but he lives in California now. Anyway, that's a film I made in the mid '80s, and we don't write every week, but I'd say we're very close.
Now, I guess just final question, because documentary, especially in recent years, has pushed the conventional form that people sort of expected from documentary, and it's evolved and it's taking on new shapes. And I'm kind of curious, from your perspective, where do you think documentary film is going?
Well, I think a documentary film it's so exciting right now to me. Documentaries are jaw-droppingly fantastic. I've been watching the new crop of films that are going to be in consideration for this year for the Academy Awards. And I just think it's thrilling what a high level of narrative power they've achieved and a high level of sort of storytelling. That wasn't true when I started. There were good documentaries. There were certainly solid documentaries. There are many, 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 many I admire from the whole history of documentary filmmaking. But recent years have just been super exciting. The use of graphics. I don't want to single out individual films because it just it gets risky. I'm a little worried about the overuse of dramatic recreation right now. I'm not against it. One film I will single out, it came up recently, is Thin Blue Line. When that film came out in the '80s, and Errol Morris used those recreations of the different ways that people remembered the crime, what kind of car it was, what kind of taillight, the milkshake falling to the floor. There were different details that he replayed over and over. I remember seeing that at a film festival in Munich and just sitting there stunned in my seat when the film ended, saying, this is a game changer. And it was. It opened up, the Academy didn't like it at the time, they wouldn't even nominate it, but it opened the door, to what we're seeing now. And
it started its own subgenre.
It definitely did. And I'm almost wondering if we shouldn't have a third category now called hybrid, because now some films are so much, there is as much sort of recreated as there is, actual verite or interview. So I'm wondering, I think the pendulum is swinging a little far one way and needs to come back. We need some balance, or we need a third category, because
Well,
it's very difficult.
No, you're right. You're right. I mean, I would love the third category idea, but I definitely agree with you on just sort of the pendulum swinging a little bit too far the other way, because it's
Yeah.
almost gotten a little trashy, and it's hard for the general public to almost discern the difference between the art and sort of the trash nature of it.
When I was teaching, when I was teaching film some years ago, I would show Thin Blue Line, and the students actually didn't get it because they'd been watching Unsolved Mysteries, and it just looked like an issue of a case. It looked like this trashy TV show to them, which shocked me. But because, yeah, you're right. I think you're absolutely right about that. And anyway, it's really hard because, as like in the doc branch for the Academy, we have to compare like cinema verite observational documentaries to highly sophisticated political documentaries, to documentaries with a lot of like recreation in them, and fantasy stuff, and experimental documentaries. I mean, it's crazy. It's really, talk about apples and oranges right now. It's nuts, and it's frustrating because, there are a lot of really good film. You take a film like MLK FBI and compare it to Truffle Hunters and compare it to Dick Johnson Is Dead. I mean, how do you vote for those
It's
films
hard. You
against each
can't.
other?
Yeah. But thank you for making an apple of an art doc, because Queen of Hearts, Audrey Flack, really is a fantastic little film, and it made me sort of appreciate sort of the ability to, and the sort of the need to adjust when it comes to being an artist, and it's not something that gets its due, and Audrey is obviously a bit of a trailblazer in that forefront, at least from my perspective.
Well, thank you.
Well, and thanks again for the time. I really appreciated this was fun.
Okay, great. Thanks so much.
All right.
Okay, bye.